Hello guys, in this video we'll implement a URL shortener using Rust. Now you must have seen different kinds of URL shorteners or URL shrinkers on the internet, but the basic principle remains the same. You give a long URL, it generates a short URL, and then you can browse using that short URL and it redirects you to your long URL or the web page, the actual web page. So we'll clone a similar kind of web application. We'll use WebAssembly using U for our front end to add React style code, and we'll use actix web for our backend. Now I have used previously Rocket and Axiom on my YouTube channel, but today for a change we'll be using actix web, and we'll be using MongoDB for our storage. So we are using MongoDB today for schema flexibility, performance, and scalability. But we can also use a SQL database like Postgres, but for a change I'm also using MongoDB today. So let's begin. So first of all, move to the Project Explorer and make sure you are in a nice and clean directory. Open your terminal and let's add the packages. So we'll just do cargo new frontend and cargo new backend, two separate packages. And then we'll close our terminal. As you can see, we have backend and frontend. So first of all, we'll implement the backend, the business logic, and then we'll move to the frontend side. So let's add a few dependencies. Move to cargo toml file. Here we need actix web for our web server, and then we need actix cores because we have to also allow requests from browsers, and Sarday with latest version and features as derive, and then we need Sarday JSON for JSON parsing. Then we need MongoDB to connect and interact with MongoDB, and then we need Tokyo for async programming with version as latest and features as full, and then we need rand for random generator. So once our dependencies are ready, we'll move to the Project Explorer, and in the backend project in SRC we'll add a DBRS to connect and interact with MongoDB, a model RS to define our MongoDB schema or model, and a payload RS where we'll add our payload for request and response. So here we'll add pub struct shorten response and pub short URL as string, and we just need serialize. And similarly we have pub struct long URL and the generate request, we'll use it, so deserialize and pub long URL as string. So we have our payloads. Move to the model, and here we'll add pub struct URL mapping with serialize, deserialize, debug, and clone. So pub short URL as string, pub long URL as string. And now let's go to DBRS. So before we write the code of interacting with MongoDB, let's spin up MongoDB Docker image. So as always in my videos, we will not be doing any kind of installations or setups. We'll just spin up the MongoDB Docker instance, which will just use docker run MongoDB and bind on default port and the Mongo image. So it should be up and running as you guys can see it. Now let's add our code. So first of all, we'll add an app state where we'll add our collection of URL mapping. And now let's add an impl app state, and we'll add a new, so pub async fn new app state, and let client options, so client options parse and MongoDB, and on localhost I have it port 27017. That's where we bind it, await and wrap. So we have our client options. Now let's add client with options and pass client options dot unwrap, and then add our collection. So first of all, we'll add a DB. So I name it URLs DB and collection as URLs. You can name your DB and collection whatever you want, and we'll just return app state with collection. So this is new, and now let's add and retrieve. So pub async fn add and self short URL as string, long URL as string, and we'll return insert one result. So let URL mapping and URL mapping. So short URL, long URL, and let result self collection insert one URL mapping await and unwrap, and we'll just return the result. Similarly, we'll add a retrieve. So retrieve URL self short URL str option of URL mapping, and we'll just do self dot collection dot find one and use doc. So short URL as short URL that we have. Let's copy it, and then we'll just do await unwrap. So this is to retrieve using short URL. This is to add our short URL and long URL as we define in the model. And now let's add the main. So move to the project explorer and go to main rs, where we'll add our main. So let's add it. We just need model and mod db. Let's remove this. So let's add the serving part first, and we'll add our main standard IO result, and on top we'll add actix main. So first we'll add the app state, web data, and new app state, new dot await. So we have our app state. Now let's add the HTTP server, new, and move. So right here, first of all, we'll add cars, default, allow any origin. So allow any origin, allow any method, and allow any header. And allow any header. That's all we need here. Now app new. So app data, and we'll pass app state dot clone. Then we'll wrap in cars and add our routes. So one route is slash generate, let's say, which is a web post request. 2, we'll add the handler in a minute. Similarly, we have another route which just has short URL, and we route this to web get 2, and we'll add handler for this too. So once we have our app setup, now let's bind it to port 4000 and unwrap, run, await. That's all that we need. Now let's add the handlers. So first of all, we'll add generate URL, async fn generate URL, pass data web data app state, and we get JSON of long URL, and we just return impl responder. Similarly, we had another one which is redirect to long URL data web data app state, and path web path read the string that we get as a URL parameter, and impl responder. So let's pass it here, generate URL and redirect to long URL. Now let's add the implementation. So let long URL json.intoInner.long URL, let short URL format, and we'll generate short URL. So short and random, and we'll just pick U16, and we get our short URL. So data dot here, instead of short you can also add your app name, but I'll just prefer short, and add short URL dot clone long URL dot await. So this is basically calling our add method to add in our MongoDB database. And so once we add it, we'll just respond HTTP response okay, and some JSON which is shortened response. And here we'll add our short URL HTTP localhost 4000 as the path and short URL. So we return short URL, generate URL, and now let's do redirect. So short URL that we'll get from path into inner, and then if let some URL mapping data dot retrieve URL and short URL dot await. If we are able to retrieve short long URL successfully, then we want to respond with found, and we want to append the location header which will help us to redirect automatically. URL mapping dot long URL and finish. Just make sure to wrap this and finish. Else HTTP response not found, body as URL not found. So we have redirect to long, we have generate URL, and we are pretty much ready with our backend. Now let's move to the front end side. So we move to cargo terminal to add the dependencies first. So first of all, we'll add U with version latest, features as client-side rendering. Then we'll add Serde for serialization, deserialization with features as derive, request to send HTTP request. Actually, we need features JSON as well. And then we need websys, and finally WebAssembly futures. That's all we need. Once the dependencies are added, let's close all these tabs and move to the project explorer. So in your front-end package, in the root, add the index.html, which we'll need for rendering our application, and doc type HTML, HTML language as en, head empty, and body empty. And then we'll move back to the project explorer. So inside our frontend directory in src, we'll add a components directory where we'll add our shortener component and a mod.rs to expose the module. So pub mod shortener. And now let's add types and the components here. So first of all, let's add our types. Shorten response with short URL as string, and derive, deserialize, debug, and clone. Then we have struct long URL and derive, serialize, long URL as string. And then let's add our functional component. So pub fn URL shortener and returns HTML. It's a function component. URL shortener is the name. You can keep any name that you want to. And then we will add the state, use state, initialize to new string. We don't need this one from Saturday. New and short URL initially assigned to none. Once we have it, we will add the on click and on input. So let long URL dot clone and callback from move input event, and right here we will add to extract our input and set in state. So HTML input e dot target unchecked into, and long URL dot set input value. So we have our on input. Similarly, let's add on shorten URL click. So this will be calling our backend as well, and short URL so short URL clone and callback from move, and we'll just copy this and spawn local async and move, and we'll add the client HTTP client from request. Once we have the client, we will just request URL HTTP localhost port 4000/generate, the endpoint that we just added on the backend side, and then our body long URL body long URL. So we'll just refer to the long URL here, long URL clone, and once we have our long URL, we'll just send out the request and wish for a OK response. Client.post request URL dot JSON as the long URL body and send and await. So if let OK data response JSON shorten response and await then we will just set the short URL in the state. So set some short URL, and once we have our short URL, we'll just go ahead and yep, so we have our shorten URL. Now let's add a command that we'll be adding is open in new tab. So once the URL is generated, we'll show a button to open in new tab. So let short URL dot clone and callback from move, and we'll just do if let some ref URL short URL, then we'll just do JavaScript to open the new tab. So web sys window unwrap open with URL, and we'll pass the URL and unwrap. So this is just to open in new tab. We have our open in new tab ready. Now finally let's add our HTML. So let's add it. Div and so in this div we will add another div with, we'll add CSS in a minute. Let's just add HTML for now. So let's add a h1 where we'll just say URL shortener, or we can change the case and h1 close. We have our h1. Then let's add the input. So input type as text, placeholder as enter long URL, and value as long URL dot clone, and on input we'll just call our callback, which is on input, this one, and style, which we'll add in a minute. So let's keep it empty. And this is our HTML for the input. Similarly, let's add a button. On click, we will call our shorten URL, which is right here. So let's call that, and style we'll add in a minute. So right here we'll just say shorten as the button text, and then we'll close the button, and then conditionally we'll render open in new tab. Basically whenever we have some URL, only then we want to render open in new tab. So right here we will just HTML and pass the div and close the div, add the input type text, read only as true, and in the value will show the short URL that we clone, and style will add in a minute with a button that has an on click that says open a new tab, which is this one, and style will add in a minute, and then we'll just say open a new tab button, If that's not the case, then and else we want to just say HTML of div. And once we have our closing, we have a couple of divs, and that's literally all for our UI. But let me add CSS and do the formatting and show you guys. You don't have to worry because we don't waste time on writing CSS. I'll just attach the CSS in the description. You guys can copy. Okay, so there you go. We have our style ready. I've just used inline CSS because we have a very basic component. Not much we need here, so just a basic component. I'll drop this CSS, you guys can use as well. Move to man and let's render our component. So we'll just do u renderer and URL shortener new dot render. So this will basically render our component. So we have everything ready. Let's go ahead and test our application. So open your terminal, and here we'll just move to front end and do trunk serve to serve our front end. Similarly for backend, we'll just do cd to backend, and we'll just do cargo run, and let's go to this URL in our favorite browser and test our application. So here's the first look of our application, nice and clean. And we have to place our URL here. So let's say I place first of all a very basic URL. Let's say just facebook.com, and we click shorten. There you go, it gives us a short URL, and I click open in new tab, and there you go, it takes us to facebook.com. So similarly, let's place a long URL. So I copied this one, a booking.com URL, and it's a very long URL. So let's place shorten, and we get the short URL, open in new tab, and there you go, it takes us to booking.com page. And as you can see, it goes to the search page with some pre-populated fields from our URL. So basically our URL shortener is working. Give this a try, and if you guys have any problem, any questions, feel free to leave in the comments.